Hello, I'm Joshua and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost I would like to say thank you for viewing this video. It has been quite a while since I've made a video due to the start of my semester and the just mounds of work and assignments, tests, quizzes, and responsibilities that I have this semester, and being a tutor, a student, and a junior professor. So I don't have much free time these days. It's amazing how things have changed so much. But not to talk much about myself, just giving a reason for my hiatus and why there will be such long time periods in between the releases of my video when previously they had been coming out with such consistency and rapidity. The output will slow down because I have so much responsibility and things to address during the semester, the pains and the joys of being a physics major. So with that said, this video will be on INTPs and purpose and meaning. And the reason I'm making this video is by way of request from a viewer, and in respects to comments I made in a previous video on INTPs and laziness, where I remarked that I believe the symptoms of laziness in an INTP arise for a collection of reasons, and one of those reasons I cited was a lack of purpose and direction in an INTP's world, primarily because if an INTP does not know how to engage their inferior function extroverted feeling, they will feel lost and washed out in the shore of life. And I didn't really go into much detail about why that is and what Carl Jung says about the inferior function and its role in the individual psyche. And it's a point at which I would like to start at in this video, talking about Jung's thoughts on the inferior function. So Carl Jung believed that the inferior function was an individual's ability to commune, and I say commune in meaning to have connectivity, receptivity, and voice in the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious. The inferior function is largely unconscious within an individual. At least this is how Jung posits the inferior function, that though one may work to integrate it to their greatest abilities, the majority of the function will remain unconscious in the individual, even with differentiation and work. What actualization does and what differentiation does is create within the inferior function a Christ-like figure. And I say Christ-like figure because within Christian theology, it is in most Orthodox sects of Christian theology, it is Jesus Christ, the mediator between God and man. So man, in a sense, or the individual, cannot run up to the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is numinous and great, and is greater than the individual. It is something we have access to, but is not something that is stored nor housed within us. Pieces and strata of it are stored and housed within us, within our psyche, by way of our embodiment. And that's an idea I don't really want to explain, but the collective unconscious is something that is comprised of an archetypal landscape that has nodes and expressions of meaning that are too rich and too great to ever reside in a single person. So one needs to be aligned with it because it is the basis for cognition and consciousness, essentially, as Jung postulates. And so one needs to be aligned with it, but one cannot approach it because one self and own individual ego is limited. So there is an aspect of the individual that has to be the intercessionary or intermediary figure between the individual's ego and that which is greater than the individual, which stands as the collective unconscious. So that which is greater than the individual is pertinent and important to the individual's existence and their ability to find meaning in life, because the ego is a complex and a construction of the psyche by way of experiences and trauma. It is not the full picture of the individual. It does not take into account all the individual is, and it does not take into account all that nature and life will demand out of the individual. Therefore, there needs to be a greater connectivity or a means in a process for the individual to approach that which is greater than them. So that is the role of the inferior function. At least that's what Jung says the role of the inferior function is. If the individual is male, then it would be the individual's anima, and if the individual is female, it would be the individual's animus. And the anima and the animus are the guiding psychic figures for transformation, differentiation, and reconfiguration for the individual. So those are Jung's thoughts. And that's the role, generally, that the inferior function plays for an individual. So more specifically, in an INTP's life, that is the role, per se, that extroverted feeling plays, at least so far in my research and in my thoughts. Excuse me. This is where it's landed me, or this is where it's gotten me. And it's not to say that these thoughts will not change and won't be revised at some time in the future, but so far, that is how I conceive and understand extroverted feelings' role within the INTP psyche. So, departing from that thought, is to say this, that when I'm talking about an INTP, I myself being an INTP, I'm largely referencing my own experience, and there's something to be understood about an INTP is that even though we are rational individuals and we care about the universality of things and truth, we're highly subjective, and there is a great deal of individual differences from personality to personality, though individuals share the same personality. I'm not saying that this is what someone should take as gospel truth in terms of how they should consider certain issues and scenarios in their lives, but it is just amalgamation of my own personal experience in research that leads me to the conclusions I've come to. And so, with that said, I will move forward and say that when I'm talking about an INTP, it's to understand that the INTP's world is mainly dominated by introverted thinking. And it's dominated by introverted thinking and supported by extroverted intuition. Its domination by way of introverted thinking, though introverted thinking is a thinking function, and it's not really concerned with questions of values. When those things do come into the scope of introverted thinking, because it is analytical and it's introverted in nature, it's singular. And it's singular and deep diving. There is, for this reason, there is a real drive in an INTP to want to be single-minded, or single-minded is a good word to say it, in terms of finding meaning and purpose. All-consuming is another way to think about it. An INTP is driven by way of introverted thinking to have a singular focus and mode of being within the world, and to pursue that with great passion, attention, and interest. And that is, I think, the natural disposition of an INTP. And also, adding to this picture is the drive for autonomy. They come with a bent to be single-minded in terms of having a purpose and a focus, and we want autonomy chiefly, and that is the ability to direct ourselves and to direct our decisions and not to be influenced by the outside world, really. When we're coming to conclusions, when we're deciding if something is true or not, it's not usually by way of introverted thinking that we care to be influenced by things, but by way of extroverted intuition and the need it has for seeking novelty and to really run through the empirical landscape and construct a system of wisdom and understanding by way of introverted sensing. It deals with the facts, it deals with the external world. That's not the domain of introverted thinking. Introverted thinking does deal with the external world, and it does make conclusions about what's ultimately true within reality, but its concern with reality is by way of extroverted feeling and the interplay between extroverted intuition and introverted sensing. I understand the functions come in axes, but if I'm going to talk about introverted thinking as a subpersonality, I have to say, well, in its own individual right, I have to say that it's not concerned necessarily with reality on its own. It's the influence of the other cognitive functions that turns its lens from inward to anything outward and brings the outward things inward to be analyzed, to be reasoned upon, and to essentially act on and do things with. So the INTP, what can be the rub and really what leads them sort of listless is they have a chief concern for having an ultimate purpose. They like to be single-minded per se, but they expect these things to come from within. They expect these things to be derived from the self, and it's because of the contentious relationship that introverted thinking and extroverted feeling can have with one another. Because extroverted feeling, I want to now turn my attention to it to sort of elucidate how the problem emerges per se, is concerned with community. And what extroverted feeling thinks about community is ultimately that any place or collection of people that helps, understands, gives safety and hope to the individual is community. So it's chiefly concerned with community, but it's more concerned with spreading help, hope, excuse me, sorry, there's a message being flickered on my screen right now, so it's kind of distracting me. But it is, it's help, it's hope, it's ultimately support, and the extroverted feeler is concerned with community support and the community ethos. It's best at meeting people's needs. That's its role, essentially, in the world, to bring people together, create communities, and do it by way of meeting people's needs, and being chiefly concerned with the support systems that exist in the external world for itself and for its relation to other individuals. So extroverted feeling chiefly derives whatever it finds meaningful and of value out in the external world, but introverted thinking wants to separate itself from what's in the external world and doesn't really want to think about values, and doesn't really want to care about external support. An INTP doesn't need someone else to support their ideas or their way of being, and that's introverted thinking. It doesn't really want to be concerned with that, but extroverted feeling chiefly wants to be concerned with that, and that creates a problem, because an INTP may lose sight of the fact that they're human. And I said this in a previous video, that it is so easy for us to be one-sided. And it is almost as if it's a temptation to behave like an automaton, or to behave as if we are Spock or an android. We're not robots, but there is a literal temptation to behave in a manner that's representative of that mode of being. And it's because of the dominance of introverted thinking and its will and its agenda. It sort of sits at the head of the psyche and directs all else, and it moves the INTP chiefly. But the INTP, being a human being, still has anthropomorphic needs. So this is what's lost, because introverted sensing isn't well developed, and we have really bad extroverted sensing. We can't understand introverted feeling worth a damn, and we have an antagonistic relationship with extroverted feeling. So the things that we readily associate with what it means to be human fundamentally, in terms of our instincts, our drives, our passions, our cares, and our concerns, those are the things that can tend to fall deaf on an INTP, not by their own choice and their own volition. Lo and behold, to the INTP's chagrin and surprise, they're still an embodied thing, which may surprise them sometimes. So they have these aspects of creatureliness, though they don't quite realize or recognize they have these aspects of creatureliness. They're there, but they operate in the subconscious, or they operate under the scenes of the general working mechanisms of their minds. And we have such robust prefrontal cortexes. We have such strong prefrontal wiring in terms of being logical and rational, and even being imaginative and predictive and futuristic in terms of our ability to look at things. There are these elements, and they still exist. And the INTP secretly knows they exist, but they don't see them, nor can they feel them, nor really understand what it is when they come out and when they take over. And may, by way of a rational temptation, which it's, I think, everybody's dominant function tempts them to give all control over to it. It's totalitarian in nature, introverted thinking, and I think everybody's dominant function can be totalitarianistic in nature. Even extroverted feeling, all the dominant, anything that exists as an individual's dominant function can suddenly become inflated within the psyche and want to be the Third Reich, essentially, or want to be Lenin, or want to be Stalin, or communism, in a sense. It's the representation of totalitarian in the human psyche. It can be the dominant function, and it's a very real temptation. I think how strong depends from individual to individual, but I know in my own self, I'm very tempted to act as if I'm not human a lot of the times, and that's why I have to remind myself that I'm human, and to have some empathy at times, and to be emotionally responsive. That's just not where introverted thinking leads me, and I am grateful that I have strong intuition, because it's the thing that sort of balances out introverted intuition and extroverted intuition, polar introverted intuition, and secondary extroverted intuition. They help break me from that and get me outside of myself and get me thinking about ultimate meaning in terms of introverted intuition and objective reality and empiricism in terms of extroverted intuition. But there is a real temptation to give over to introverted thinking. So how does one not give over to introverted thinking? Because introverted thinking essentially makes the INTP a cyclops and wants to make them single-minded and wants to direct them and have everything that they are be derived internally and from the self. And others talk about a dominant function and tertiary function loop or a lull that one can get into, but very really the two of the first three functions for an INTP are introverted ones. So the self and them being self-centric, not necessarily, I don't like using self-centered because an INTP isn't necessarily selfish per se in the pejorative manner, but is self-centric. They're deriving things from self and they're concerned with self, and that's where their concern for autonomy comes from. But it's just that they don't actually realize, because they are a human being, they have fundamental human needs that they won't be able to escape from. They just won't get around them. For myself, I have always had an antagonistic relationship with my emotions. More so, I have had an antagonistic relationship with sexuality and my sexual desire. I mean, I like sex, but at the same time, I don't like being dependent on it, and I don't want to be persuaded and manipulated by another person, a woman's sex appeal. I hate that sometimes, and I will ignore a pretty woman at times because it's like she's pretty, and I know that the natural response would be to give in to her because of her appeal, but I'll ignore that and sort of be antagonistic to that desire itself, and I'll stifle my own desires because they're irrational. And it's something about introverted thinking that wants to stamp out irrationality, though it as a function is completely logical and internally consistent, but there's things about it that are escape its privy in terms of how it's incomplete. INTPs, or introverted thinking, can be totalitarianistic in terms of it creating models and creating really great models, and these models being so pristine and so accurate in their description of reality and what constitutes truth, that introverted thinking will accept them for truth and then think it doesn't need to pay attention to anything else because it's not necessary. Essentially, it's created the ultimate model and everything that it needs to work with, so why go outside the self, and is it even necessary to go outside the self? So this is a place that a lot of INTPs are, per se, and it's only really extroverted intuition can help one break sort of the monotony and the cycle of being totally megalomaniacal and completely myopic in some respects, but it's really extroverted feeling that will be the seed of salvation for the INTP. And it's not the seed of salvation in terms of being any more socially capable. A lot of times, extroverted feeling in a Western, particularly in America, is just seen as being socially savvy and being able to move through a social situation with a high deal of social intelligence. And it can be that. That's one way it can express itself, but that's not the reason for it. And it's the base structures of it that the INTP needs to bring up from the basement of their mind, sort of the self that they ignored at some point in time, at least for me, because of my youth, and for an INTP, for other reasons. And I'm not saying every INTP is just totally disjointed in their psychic development, but I know when one lacks meaning and purpose and is concerned with the question of meaning and purpose, there is a disjointed psychic constitution, and I think when it is coming from an INTP, it is stemming from their inability to commune with extroverted feeling. And that's the basis of my argument, and that's where I want my argument to start from. This will be part one, because I want the individual to think about and digest what I'm saying. And in part two, I'll talk more about, after flushing out the problem and really the space and where an INTP can be, in part two, I'll say, at least from my experience and my research, what one needs to do to commune with extroverted feeling, and understanding extroverted feeling in a very general way to be able to see what it is one can do, per se. Not maybe should, but can do. So that's my video, and thank you for watching.